Welcome to Network Capital, Rehan.
Thank you, Utkarsh.
We're excited to learn more about you.
Thank you.
Tell us who you are.
Utkarsh, my name is Rehan A. I grew up in a very small town in UP, Aligarh, a university town. And over the last 45 years, I've spent time growing up in Middle East, North Africa, went to university in the US and spent a decade in the US, another decade in Europe, and the last decade in Asia. And I started my career as a waiter and a night porter in a 4-star hotel just off Bond Street.
And where are you today?
Today I run an early stage fund. It's called FirstPenguin Capital. We invest largely in very early stage companies, pretty much at the concept stage all the way to when they're raising friends and family round in health tech and in consumer tech.
Why are you doing this? You had a pretty successful corporate career.
Look, Utkarsh, if I look at careers, there is no concept of careers left today. So if you guys think what we used to think, what I used to think when I started out, 25 years ago, that you know what, I'm going to have a career with a company and I'm going to X and Y and Z and I'm going to go up the ladder, that whole world has disappeared. That whole world doesn't exist today. It's even difficult to think what will happen in 3 or 5 years. So first thing, career as a fur coffin in which you can lay back and enjoy yourself is gone. What does exist? What exists today is eat what you can kill. What exists today is what you can devise for yourself, create for yourself, learn for yourself. So those 2 or 3 things are driving me, especially to move away from what I was doing before, which is, I've done a number of things. I was a president of the region, Asia Pac, China and India for a healthcare services company. Prior to that, I ran a $2 billion public listed pharma company, et cetera, et cetera. From this mainstream large business approach, I am getting involved very actively with startups and with young entrepreneurs who I can work with, who I can learn from, and also invest some money in their journey and hope to help them build multiple businesses in Asia, in India, and other places.
Tell us a bit about the trends that you see becoming mainstream when it comes to future of work.
Look, I think in general, there are lots of people sharing trends and future and lot of things. And everything I've learned and everything I've read kind of boils down to 5 things, okay? And I can tell you that perhaps for the next 18 months, for the next 2 years. Beyond that, I think it's very hard to predict what's going on. The first trend, which all of you know, and I think all of you are very comfortable with hopefully by today, is about data, is about big data, about machine language, about analytics, is about using computers to do things that we were not able to do, even 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago. So understanding that is pretty important. A couple of my investment companies, for example, a company called BetterHalf.ai that's looking at dating and matching and getting married using machine language and AI is looking to crack this in that sector. We have another company in our portfolio called Parent Lane that's looking to do this for pediatrics and early child development, and so on and so forth. So I think this is one area that's only going to get bigger and broader and deeper and is going to fundamentally change sectors and industries as we go forward. So understanding this, at least to a basic level, is very important. The second piece is about understanding science. Now, I'm not talking about, basic science or quantum mechanics or other types of science. I'm saying just an understanding of science and computers is very, very important. Those are broad areas. You don't have to become an expert in it. But if you don't know it completely and you ignore it, no matter what you're doing, whether you're a writer or whether you are, content publisher, if you are a scientist, if you are another kind of expert, even a salesperson, this is pretty important. These 2 things are pretty important. I think the third thing, most of our culture, especially in Asian culture, especially in India, is about go to university, get the best grades, be at the top of your class, and life is going to take care of itself from then on in your career. That has completely flipped over the last, say, a decade. And I think in the coming decade, what machine language, what AI cannot do is empathy. It cannot really do real collaboration. It cannot do real partnership. It is resilient in some ways, but you need to be resilient as a human being, and certainly humility is a unique characteristic that's important in collaborating. So I think those things are very important. Building that muscle is very important for you as you are in your career, in whatever you're doing. Respect for others, making sure they like you is important. People like to work with people that they like. So I think if we as human beings, as managers, as leaders, as workers, if we develop that muscle and continue to develop it in a much better way, we will do a big service to ourselves, big service to our teams, and from a growth perspective, we'll continue to grow. Um, you know, one message that I always like to send to my colleagues and people that I work with is to have a point of view, to know something and get to know something that others don't know. That doesn't mean you hoard information. What that means is for you to have a point of view. But in order to have a really refined point of view and a better point of view and a growing point of view, you need to make mistakes. Often in Asia, and especially in our country, in India, we don't like to make mistakes. We want to do the right, the perfect thing and continue to growing on a trajectory. But the more mistakes you make, the better your point of view gets, the more refined you get. And the more you know of what perhaps many people may not know. So I think I would urge you as early part of your career to try different things, to make a lot of mistakes. And I think later part of your career, perhaps even when you are my age or even younger than me, you would be way wiser than I am and way wiser than many of my colleagues. The fifth thing I'd like to tell you is don't trust me on 1 to 4, okay? You don't have to trust me on that. But do trust me on the one thing, which is to learn. Learn as much as possible. Learn whenever you can. Learn from everybody. Your mentors are everywhere. Not just people above you, not just people who are seniors or running companies, but also people who work with you, people who may be your juniors. And I think Utkarsh, you said something to me this morning when we were having a cup of coffee, which is the world is full of noise, right? It's full of data. There's an overwhelming number of things being thrown at you. So how do you cut through this large amount of noise and have some clarity on an ongoing basis? And, trust me on this second thing as well, which is if you don't do it already, meditate a little bit, spend some time with yourself. If you have a couple of weeks free, go do Vipassana. That reflection, that time with yourself will often teach you as much as books or movies or partnerships with people or making mistakes will. So those are my 5 things, Utkarsh.
You're somebody who's made both young people successful as well as people of different levels of seniority. How have you done that, and how have you grown in the process, and what have you learned?
So Utkarsh, I think this is, like we talked about it this morning, this is maybe another podcast. I'd love to talk to your audience about Sydney Street Collective. I'll take 30 seconds to tell you what it is, and then I'll answer your question. So Sydney Street Collective is an organization, a very simple, small organization. We started as a nonprofit 10 years ago. It has about 25 people who've gone through it. We take 2 to 4 people every year. And when I was at Abbott and subsequently at DaVita, folks have gone through this program. Something like 95% of people from our program have gone to Harvard and Stanford and MIT in Chicago. So we've had a tremendous amount of success in this program. Now, the program works on a very simple basis, which is if you serve others and you work with them to make them successful, you'll be successful. That's all it is. To me, I think any leadership job, and about 12 years ago or so, I started running companies. To me, most of those roles, bulk of those roles, about making others successful. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do you differentiate yourself in the market, and how do you come on new products and all that stuff. But it all starts with people, and especially in a country like ours and across Asia, our biggest IP, if you want to call it, the biggest, most powerful tool in our pocket is our teams, and how do you make them successful? So I ride this journey with some mistakes. I've learned a tremendous amount from my colleagues in Sydney Street Collective and others. I think this is every day a new learning.
Excellent. You were speaking here at the Harvard University at the India conference. You're somebody who goes to different universities around the world. Do you think that universities and schools both are preparing leaders ready for tomorrow? If not, what else should they be thinking about?
Utkarsh, I think is an excellent question. I think universities can only do so much for us. Yeah, they can teach us the basics of math and science and analytics and liberal arts and ways to approach problems and ways to solve problems, and especially in a country like the United States where you have people from all over the world, or at Harvard or MIT or wherever else, people coming from all over the world trying to solve different types of problems. So I think yes, if one is lucky enough to study in these places, or other universities in this country, I think that that adds a lot of value. I don't think that mainstream universities, especially in America, in this country, are ready for what's coming next. And part of the reason is because A, they're exceedingly expensive. Not, a very small percentage of the world population, even the wealthy world population, can have access to them. I think that a lot of the education is peer-to-peer education. A lot of the education is like your platform, which is about peer advice, peer engagement, peer resourcing. A lot of the platform is no longer in a room that you can come to in Cambridge or in Alabama or Wisconsin or wherever. A lot of that is going to be online. I think the universities are looking at it, but the universities are kind of like this, right? No organization changes with a high cost structure, which the universities have, with a high infrastructure process and a high brand, a large brand that they've got in place, and breaks it down voluntarily. Often that change comes from somewhere else. So, the obvious question is, would places like Harvard and MIT not exist in 10 years? No, of course, they will exist. They are growing organizations and they have a very strong brand. But would they have a similar level of influence that they had 50 years ago? I don't know. If they continue to change and continue to engage, they will. I think MIT's done this in a very active way with online education. About a decade ago, Harvard has done some parts of that. But I think the jury is out for me to say the universities will play as large a role as they have played over the last 50 years. There's many new models of education and engagements that are coming, and some of them have not even been created yet.
Some people have stated that education has become a bit of an insurance policy, an expensive insurance policy at that. Do you agree?
I think the first degree is an insurance policy of a type. Basically because universities tend to be, depending on where you study, wherever you study, whether you study in Aligarh or Banaras, or you study in Tokyo, or you study in Cambridge, you do get into a hiring hall where employers go out and recruit. So yes, there is a bit of an insurance policy situation there. But having said that, that insurance, the insurance policy is declining in the way that it will be impacted in the future. I'll give you an example. If you have a 4-year degree, you get into a job, you do that job for a couple of years, perhaps you go start a company, perhaps you join somewhere else. After 2 or 3 years, where you went to university matters much less today than it did 30, 40 years ago. If you went to Harvard 50 years ago, or 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you were largely guaranteed a reasonable living for the next 20, 30 years. I don't think that's guaranteed anymore. You may be guaranteed to get into a nice job, get into a hiring hall and be recruited. But I don't think 20 years later you can coast on your degree from MIT or Harvard. I think that world has disappeared.
When you meet people from around the world, students especially, and students these days, what is the big difference that you see from your generation to what's happening today?
I think I'm very excited when I meet folks between the ages of 20, 21, or 20 and 30, or even a little bit older, because one, they are fundamentally questioning the way X, Y, Z industries operate. And many of these people are looking to disintermediate, to change these industries. For example, the entrepreneurs who are running, the 2 entrepreneurs who both went to MIT coincidentally, who are running BetterHalf.ai out of Bangalore and Cambridge, these people are looking to say, look, we're going to change how marriages happen in the Indian market and in the diaspora. And they will extend this tech, if they do it, they can extend this tech to other things as well beyond matching people. They can match houses and they can match cars and other things as well. This is pretty audacious. I mean, even if I look back in my generation 20, 25 years ago when we started out, none of us thought, or very few of us thought, that we could change an entire industry or entire sector. I think there are lots of people between the ages of 20 to 30 looking at every sector, government, non-profits, foundations, other for-profit sectors. That's the first thing. The second piece is that we had very little noise compared to the kind of noise that was being thrown at people then. So we were relatively, we thought of careers as a perpendicular line at 45-degree angle. You keep on climbing. I think most people in 20 to 30 have a different level of insecurity. They realize that this is not going to happen. Some may not know it as in such an obvious way. Some may think of it in a more intuitive way, but they look at the world changing. So I think out of this this chaos comes a lot of creative stuff, and a lot of good things will come out of it. And I think the third thing is I find the maturity of 20, 25-year-olds to be way above from what I knew of my friends and I when we were 20, 25. I think we were a lot more carefree, and we were not as sophisticated in our thinking. We were not as career-oriented. Or perhaps maybe that was just the people I was hanging out with. So I don't know. But I find I'm actually pretty excited by this new generation.
Is the early dawn of maturity in 20 to 25, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Because one might say that your playfulness early on gave you the appetite as well as prepared you to go for the long haul instead of being burnt out at 25 and having a quarter-life crisis.
Look, I think you have a point. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that in a balanced way, because most people I knew were not that serious about their careers in the early 20s. Most people I knew. I'm not sure if we were more playful or we were more relaxed. I just think that we were a little uninformed. We didn't have the access to this much information and quick access to information and quick connection and network capital type platform that we could reach out to a few hundred people to get help. So we didn't know. And what we did not know, we did not know. I don't know if this will end up with crisis. I think that if a young person, in fact, I'll give you an example. I met with a very smart young woman who used to work with me and now is at HBS and finishing up HBS, and she was my chief of staff when I was at DaVita. She's gone and done a Vipassana course for 10 days. None of us even knew what Vipassana was when we were in our early 20s. She's 25 years old. She's done Vipassana. Now, she definitely, having done this 10 days of meditation, has a different level of clarity about her life. My sense is exactly the opposite. So, if all one does is focus on one's career and only thinks of tomorrow, yes, you're right, they may end up with a crisis early on. But if one takes some time and reflects inwards and is humble and meets lots of people and learns from them, actually one is much stronger than somebody even in my ages. Because lots of folks at my age, in their late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, are realizing that guess what? The career they thought was some, light shining at the top of the hill with a pot of gold is not that. That's disappearing. Companies are being sold off. They're being broken up. What's happening to GE is happening across multiple sectors. So it's a time of tremendous change, but also a time of tremendous opportunity.
When young people pursue audacious goals, when they try to disrupt sectors and challenge status quo, it is likely that they will fail multiple times. And some of them would be breakthrough successes, many would not. What's your advice to millennials to deal with failure and keep at it?
Look, I think if you've never failed in your career or your life, ultimately you failed. Because if all you do is follow the safest possible route up whatever climb you're on, well, you're probably not going to have great views, you're probably not going to enjoy it as much, you're probably also not going to suffer, and it's going to be a pretty safe place you're going to end up at. My own sense is that's how we looked at it when I was younger. Today, if you don't fail, you're going to fail. Because you have to fail in 3, 4, 5 things in order to find what you can do. I mean, I was seeing, a a video by a real estate, probably the largest real estate player in the Middle East, guy who started Imar. And he said, look, I started a shoe company, I started a fashion company, I started all these things, and I failed. And out of that failure came this $200 billion real estate business that I've built. Now, this was in my generation. In this generation, the next one, I believe three things. One, resilience is a force multiplier. So, and you get resilient by falling down and getting up again, and falling down and getting up again. Number two, positivity is a force multiplier. So if you're positive and you think about things, you can make many things happen for yourself and those around you by just dreaming it and then working hard to create it. And number three, unless you learn, what you knew 6 months ago, 8 months ago, what you learned in university 4 years ago is actually kind of irrelevant. So you have to keep learning. So I think that would be my piece of advice. Be clear about your strengths and weaknesses. Find out people in your team who can work with you, who have other strengths and weaknesses, and build something together. And keep on learning, and keep humble, and learn about yourself by meditating and by focusing on what you don't know.
What are you reading these days, or what is the most interesting book that you read recently?
I've read Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, which I'm sure many of your audience have read. I think it's a fascinating book. I'm reading a book called a book about mortality. I often read about a book called I think it's called The 5 Gifts. Just started it. I'm also reading, so as I'm getting older, I'm realizing 2 or 3 things. Life is limited. It's not going to go on forever. So you have a limited amount of time. Do what you can in the best way that you can. And the next book I'm looking to read is also Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus. And so yeah, my interests are mostly non-fiction, although I do read a little bit of fiction and a little bit of poetry as well. I think poetry is probably, and fiction is probably the best way to learn about others, to get into other people's shoes, to learn about other cultures. What you should not be reading, I'll give you my unsolicited 2 cents, is business books written by business school professors. 98% of those are junk in my view. I mean, a few of those are not good, of course.
Tell me more about that.
So look, if you have non-practitioners writing books telling practitioners what to do, okay? And when I was in business school, we used to get a book every other week from some professor who came to speak to us. Frankly, most of those books were rehashed nonsense. And they were trying to fit a very inexact, very complex world into these boxes, into these cases. They were tremendously boring. What is infinitely interesting is if you read fiction from different parts of the world. So if you read something from Turkey, you read something from Brazil, you read, 100 Years of Solitude, or, you read books, you read Vikram Seth, or you read whatever. You read books from all over the world, Japanese authors, whatever. That will give you tremendous insight into that culture. It'll give you tremendous insight into how people react and work with each other. Ultimately, none of us are going to be working in the future with just our own culture. Most of your audience all over the world is going to work with people from across the world. So understanding and being in the shoes of others, I think, is a very important asset. And the better you get at it, the better you get at collaboration, the stronger you'll get. The lower your ego, the stronger your confidence. Let's not confuse the two. That is an important part of growing as a human being and becoming a better partner to others. So that's one. The second piece is poetry. And I think different people like different types of poetry. I like Urdu Sher o Shairi, Urdu poetry. And there is tremendous amount of insight in Urdu poetry. Tremendous amount of insight. Stuff written 200-300 years ago makes a lot of sense in this world today. So I think both of those are very useful. Some of you, if you want to read more about Urdu poetry, there's an online portal called Rekhta, rekhta.org. It has all the poets around the world. I mean, all the poets who are Urdu poets on it. So on. I mean, you can find lots of resources to read about poetry and literature. So I think those two are pretty important as you develop as a leader, as a manager, as a contributor.
What's the best investment you've made in yourself?
You know, I'd like to say the best investment was in my 30s, going running every day for 7-8 years. So the best investment is finding an hour or two to yourself, whether that's meditation, that's yoga, that's running. That's probably the number one. The number two investment is, meeting my wife, finding emotional happiness, finding a partner. I think that to me is a very important part of happiness. And probably the third thing is reading everything that you can find under the sun. Now, some people say, well, no, don't do that. Make a list of 50, 100 books you read before you die. Perhaps that's someone else's view. I don't subscribe to that. I think I'm more organic. I'll read 2 or 3 books, and then I'll find something that excites me in those books, and I'll read something else. And so it's a constant process of learning and search.
Is there something that you truly believe in that most people disagree with you on?
I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question without thinking about it a little bit. And frankly, my honest answer is I'll have to think about it a little bit. Yeah, there's probably a few things. I think,
you don't need to tell us, but are there things?
Look, there are a few things certainly I believe in. And I think I'll give you one obvious example from work.
Please.
In corporate world, in a large corporation, politics plays a big part. And many times the people who get most successful in large corporations are pretty good at navigating the politics and often playing it quite actively. I never believed it. I never believed it when I was a brand manager, 18 years ago. I never believed it when I was running a small business as a business unit head. I didn't believe it when I was country manager, when I was MD, when I was a region president. I don't believe in politics. I try to move politicians out of my teams actively. I think politicians are very important in the parliament and other places, but politics is energy sapping. It destroys value. It's a time waste. It does exist. You have to reduce it to a small extent as a leader, or as a contributor, or as a manager, whatever. But that's something I fundamentally don't believe in, and I've made certainly in my own career an active process to remove it.
We're gonna do these video casts and podcasts more regularly with you. But any parting advice from you to our listeners about how they should be thinking about 2019? Any parting words of wisdom?
Look, I wouldn't call them words of wisdom. I don't think I have any special wisdom.
Well, we think you do. That's why we're asking you.
Right. Okay. Look, I think the one advice I would give you is in your environment today, whatever environment you're in, 5-person team, 10-person team, 1,000-person team, 10,000-person team, find someone to whom you will help, to whom you'll provide help, who can do nothing for your life or career. Nothing. Okay? So that could be your security guard, that could be the guy who cleans the bathroom, or the lady who brings you tea, or who works in your home, or you're somebody who you will help, who will do nothing for your career, who will do nothing for your life, who can do nothing for your life. Everybody, 90% of people kiss upwards, okay? And a small percentage of those kiss upwards and kick downwards. So obviously, never kiss upwards and kick downwards. I'm not telling you not to kiss upwards, but I'm also telling you to kiss people in your team, help people in your team, or people you know in your environment who can do nothing for you. I can assure you, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, if you continue to do it, it will bring you tremendous personal happiness. It will bring you tremendous satisfaction when you look back on your life. That's what I learned in my own life, and somebody taught me this. Certainly I can say that if you practice that in 2019 or 2029, no AI, no machine language, nothing else will disintermediate that, nothing else will break that down. That will bring you a lot of happiness. That's my 2 cents.
The joy of giving. Perfect note to end this series. Talk to you soon, Rehan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.